Hi, and welcome to the first tutorial for Architecture 243. In this tutorial, I'll be covering the general interface of Photoshop. Be looking at some of the menus, looking at some of the toolbars, looking at some of these side panels, talk about their use and their importance as you're working through manipulating images. It's important to understand the essence in Photoshop. It's really about image manipulation. You can almost think about it as a digital darkroom. When a darkroom, you would begin to manipulate an image through various analog techniques. Here, digitally, we can do that here, so you can think about Photoshop in general as an image manipulation tool. Illustrator is a bit more of a layout tool. Also, there's some graphic elements. InDesign is pure layout for booklets and so forth. So it's important to understand the context of each of those pieces of software. Okay, so the general interface for Photoshop. There are a few main areas. There are pull-down menus here at the top. There you can see general file components here, open and close images, import, export, and so forth, print. We have edit. Here's where you can get into some image manipulation tools, scale, rotate. You can fill and stroke, meaning you can add a thickness to a line if you have a selection. Your undos are here, copy, paste, and so forth. And I would be talking about some of the major tools throughout. Image here really is talking about what kind of image it is that you're working with. Generally, if you're bringing in an image from, say, a digital camera, it's going to be an RGB image. You can convert that to 4-color. That's considered, RGB is 3-color process. You can convert that to a 4-color, which is going to be more color information, more accuracy, also larger file sizes. So in general, I recommend that students work in the 3-color mode process, and if they want to get to some heightened levels of accuracy in terms of printing, to convert that to CMYK before exporting. There's also grayscale and some other variables here, but those are the major modes we'll be talking about: grayscale, RGB, CMYK. There are adjustments here: brightness and contrast, levels. We'll get into these a little bit later. The first exercise will get into hue and saturation. I'll show you how to work with that. And there's some various other adjustments that you can make to the overall image. Some of the other major elements here is the image size. Here, if I click that, we can see the actual pixel dimension of the image. We can change that if we'd like to here. I might change the proportion. Here we can lock or unlock to constrain proportions or not constrain proportions to keep it relative to the original image so it's not distorted. And the overall document size, the resolution. This is from a digital camera, so it's 72 dots per inch at this pixel resolution. Let's see, image rotation, general rotating of the overall canvas. It's important to understand the difference between the image size, which is the actual image itself, and the canvas size. The canvas size is the actual working area that you're working on. The image is independent of that. So if I wanted to change the width of this to say 50, you're going to notice some white bars along the side, or in this case it's transparent. So that's the canvas that you're seeing with that checkerboard, and that's different and independent than the actual image. Those are some of the major elements there. Layers, I generally ask or have people look to the actual layer panel on the right-hand side over here to really work with layers, so I'll talk about that with respect to that panel. You can do type and text in Photoshop. There are various selection tools that are here that also make a bit more sense using the toolbar, depending on how you're working. Some of what we will be working with is some filters, particularly a motion blur filter, which you can see right here. These are various filters, as it's named, to distort an image. So you can distort it based on blurring, you can add noise, you can pixelate it, you can render various sort of effects, you can sharpenize it, stylize it, and I encourage you to kind of just work through some of those filters just to kind of get it out of your system. It tends to be something that people really get excited about, and that's great, so you understand the interface and everything, but ultimately we want this to be about ideas and some conceptual stance that's related to a project or set of ideas in a design process, and so we want to be strategic about using some of these ultimately. So we'll be concentrating on using the blur tool. There's some 3D capability in Photoshop that we will not be getting into. You can set up different views or zooming here and so forth, window attributes, and a help menu. Along the left-hand side is the main toolbar. Here we have the Move tool. So it's this little arrowhead there, and if I have that tool selected, which I do, I just clicked on it, I can move the image around. Now I've just done that and moved around. If I hit Control Z at the same time, that's my undo to get back to the original state. There are various selection tools. Pretty much this first category up to this little line here is about just working specifically with the image there, not necessarily getting into manipulating it. It's more so about selection areas, cropping the overall image, and drawing some tonality from it from the eyedropper tool here. So the next is a marquee tool. That's basically a rectilinear selection tool. I've just selected it, and I can drag a rectangle to select a particular area of the image, and I can hit Control D to deselect. If I hit this little dog ear, you see some of these tools have these dog ears, that means it's an expandable icon, and I can get to different kinds of selection marquees, elliptical, and so forth. Generally, rectilinear seems to be one of the more useful. The next one down is also a selection tool. It's the lasso tool, and I'll expand that. You see that here is a lasso tool just in general, so it's a free form kind of selection tool. So it'll allow me to make free form selections. If I want to be a little bit more accurate, say given angles or straight lines, I can use the polygonal lasso tool, so I can select very particular lines, be a little bit more precise with my selection. In general, when you double click, it will close. I just hit it a little bit further away. I'll select here, here, and you see that little circle that pops up once I get close to where I began. That'll complete that selection, so that adds for a little bit more precision. The magnet lasso tool, that'll tend to, you can sort of drag, hold down your left click on your mouse, and drag by various images, and based on contrast and so forth, it's going to make a selection. I don't use this very much, but you can see how it works. And I'll try to capture this edge. So I'll just start here, and you see it's sort of following the top of the buildings here. And if it's a stark enough contrast, changing color, it'll be fairly accurate. Just follow that. I'm going to come around the edge here. And that didn't do so well up in that corner. I'll let go, find where I began. You can, there it is. And so we have that selection tool. So it didn't do so well in these corners here, but you get an idea on how it could work. There's various options that you can see along this top bar, just below the menu bar. There are some variables that you can begin to work with, and that's true for many of the tools that we'll be seeing here. So Control D, remove that selection. The next one down is the Magic Wand tool. And so if I select this, and you notice as well the pop-ups, they come up with a shortcut key here. So for Magic Wand tool, W is the shortcut. L is the shortcut for lasso, so if I just type in L, I'll get to that tool. M for marquee, so M for marquee will get me to that marquee selection tool. Magic wand there. and just hit the W. So what this will basically do, and again, there are different tolerances. You could set this higher or lower. It's going to select an area that's in kind. So right now I'm looking at this cloud. I'll try to select as best I can the white area. So I make that one selection, and it did a pretty decent job. And it's going to, once it gets into some blues here mixed with the white, it's not going to select that. One nice quick tool while we're in this, and I believe that you can get to it under this drop down as well, is different selection options. And so here I can deselect, I can inverse the selection, so I'm selecting everything but that cloud there. I'll inverse it back just to the cloud. Now I'll look at the various layers that can be associated with the selection. I can also grow the selection, so increase the area, or select similar. So everything that's that same color will be selected throughout the image. And I could, I'm just going to hit my delete key, delete that out of the image. Perhaps that's for some other effect that I'm looking for. That's part of what I'm actually asking you to do in the first exercise. I am going to Control Z that and then move that selection. Okay, then we have the pull down for that. That's basically most of what I end up using. The quick selection tool I don't use as much. The magic wand is what we'll be using. The other thing to keep in mind with this course as it's related to software is generally it's not an entire comprehensive and absolutely thorough look at each piece of software. It's really about developing workflows using each of the pieces of software. So in this case, we're going to be looking at specific tools within each of the software programs. So that's why I'm not necessarily going over and reviewing every piece, as you kind of get in deeper into it on your own and years to come, and then you can kind of elaborate on your skill set there. But I'm just going to concentrate on getting everybody moving here using the tool. So the next down is the crop tool, and you see what happens right away is that these little grips come up on the edge of the image. So I can now change the area, and that was actually a escape out of that. I can grip the corner here and crop a certain area. I can move the image around. So if I wanted to crop, a large majority of the image out, I could do that. I'm going to hit escape to get out of that. So different cropping possibilities there. The eyedropper tool, this is related to what's down here, which is the foreground and the background colors. I can begin to assign different colors to selection areas and so forth, so I can fill a certain area with a particular color. And the way that you can create the colors or identify the colors, there's a few. You can use the swatches, which are over here to the right, or I can actually select some colors that are within the image itself. So the eyedropper tool, I'm going to draw right from that image, and you can see the foreground color change to whatever that brick color was right here. If I selected this blue, let's see it change to the blue. Now that's the foreground color that is selected. If I decided to create a selection area and I wanted to fill that area, I just right-click to create this pop-out menu here. That was the same for selection tools, select, deselect, select inverse, and so forth, or similar. I can fill that area with a particular color. So now this pop-up comes up and asks me if I wanted to use the foreground color, which is the blue, the background color, which is white, or some other color, or content aware, or we'll draw and use an algorithm to kind of fill that in a particular way. So if you want to edit out something that didn't look quite right, you could do that, and it would be content aware. In this case, I'm just going to use the foreground color, 100% opacity, that's all fine. And so there we have that area. It's a little bit problematic because I'm only on one layer right now, but I'll get into that in a little bit. Control Z to undo that, and I can Control D to remove that selection area. Next, what we have are some various manipulation. Now we're getting into more of the manipulating the image itself. spot healing. If there's some artifacts on the image or what have you, you can use the spot healing tool. You could create the brush, so you can create an airbrush sort of effect. So it's going to use the foreground color and background color accordingly, and so you can see I'm using that to create some brushing effects. Control Z. And there are other tools that you can use, a pencil, and so forth. The brush and the pencil tend to be the ones that people use the most. Another interesting image manipulation tool is the clone stamp tool, and this is sort of a variation of what the Band-Aid tool does. The Band-Aid tool, if I select a particular area here, it's going to use an algorithm and try to kind of fill that in accordingly. There was nothing very different happening there. I'll Control C. A little bit of difference. It added some blue, but you can see how it was content aware. I can also use the healing brush tool. So if I now hold down the Control key, the Alt key, it's going to have now a reference area to fill in some other area. So I just click down in that blue zone right there, and I wanted my brush maybe to be a little bit bigger. I'll select up here to increase the size. There we go. And if I wanted to brush in some of that area, you can see where it's content aware, and it's going to take a little time and think about it and fill that area in accordingly, taking in consideration what the rest of the image is. So it looks a little funky because I just blew out part of that building, but you get an idea of the effect. Control C that. The stamp tool is similar, but it's a lot more absolute. The Band-Aid tool tries to use an algorithm within Photoshop to blend it into the rest of what's happening within the image. In this case, I'll hold my Alt key down for a reference area, so I want to reference, well, let's say somewhere down here. My brush is really tiny right now, so I can go here to this drop down, increase my brush size. I can also manipulate the hardness. So if I want to be really absolute and hard, I can do that. And so it's really replicating that area down below. You can see the corresponding X that's in the reference area. Control Z. If it's a little bit softer, it's going to be more of an airbrush feel. So a little bit foggier on the edges. You get the idea, it's a little bit more forgiving than that absolute hard brush. Control Z to remove. Pattern stamp, I don't recommend really getting into that. I don't really use that tool. It's the clone stamp that tends to be the most useful. And here, history brush tool, it's not something I get into too often. I get into that a little bit later, so you can step back, I suppose, using the brush tool. The erase tool, you can make just erase part of the image, as you might imagine. Increase that brush size, I can just erase here. I'm going to do something quick. You notice when I erase this area, this is checkerboard, which is actually the canvas that we're seeing. And I have to manipulate the image or actually work the layers to get it to do that. Otherwise, it'll be a white background or whatever the background color is set up for in the image. So if I remove that image, I don't want to save it. Let me go back to my files here. I'm just going to right click in this window, go to Open with Photoshop. There we have the image, and you notice here it comes in with a layer that says background in the lower right hand corner. I'll double click on that, and it's just going to default to layer 0. That's fine. Before I do that, I'll show you the erase tool, see what will happen. It'll just be white. And so that's like still a solid image. Those are white pixels instead of there being nothing. Control C. So if I double click back on the layer, see layer 0 is fine. And then I start making some of the erasings. Now I'm actually looking through the pixels to nothing. So I could save that image to maintain, probably as a PNG, to maintain that whole if I wanted that effect. Or I could, use a various selection tool to be more precise about a selection. See here, there's the beginning of it, and I can just hit delete, and it'll have the same effect as the erase. select. Now I've stepped in with a few commands here, and the Control-Z will only let me step back one. So it's the back and forward. And you can see here the history of what's going on. Generally I have this open, so I can step back in history here. Erasure, make layer. I'm going to keep it there, so I have layer 0, and I'm back to the image as it is untouched. Okay, back to this area over here, the toolbar. Gradient tool, we don't use the gradient tool very much. This is the blur tool, so if you wanted an area, just a specific area that you wanted to blur, again, so there's a brush associated with this. I can start to blur, and after kind of moving over, I'm just holding my left click down. You can see that corner is getting somewhat blurred here. If I Control Z, you can see it kind of lightens up. So there's a blur tool. In this, there's a sharpen tool, so you can sharpen it up a little bit, or you can smudge it. So this is almost thinking about, again, this is an analog for actual physical photograph development, and there were inks and so forth that were associated with the paper that you'd be working with. So in this case, the smudge tool will be moving some of that around. So it's just going to smudge that there. Okay. And it's going to take a little bit of time to think about. It's a fairly big image. Control Z. So there's those tools, these tools. This is the burn tool. I'm going to just set this back to blur. This is the burn tool here. And if I hold it down, this little dog here, there's also a dodge tool. And so this is, again, harkens back to an enlarger and how you would develop actual photo paper. The dodge tool would allow the paper to not be as developed, so it would be removing light and removing development time from the actual manipulation of the chemical on the photo paper. So that would make it lighter if there was a dark area. So I just manipulated the size. I right-clicked to do that. And then I can go to a particular area. You can see I was just lightening up certain areas here. If I just wanted a little bit more clarity, say kind of a little bit dark, I could kind of dodge that area. And in the actual dark room, you just have basically a little piece of wire with a circle of construction paper that was black, just to limit the light exposure. But that's basically the effect that we're looking for here. So you can lighten up the images. I'm going to jump back my layers there, or you can burn it in so it gets a little bit darker. So the opposite, so you actually expose it a little bit more and limit the other areas. And the sponge tool, looks here, just kind of desaturates it a little bit, affects the development. I don't use the smudge tool very often, but there's you can see how it manipulates and takes out some of that blue and kind of it's a desaturating effect. Okay, back there, there's a pen tool where you can create various paths. We won't really get into using that. There is a text tool, although I'll be asking everyone to use Illustrator to create text for their photo montages in the first exercise. This is the path selection tool, again, that's related to paths that you create with a pen. These are shapes that you can create. We'll use Illustrator for most of that. Hand tool is just for panning. So if I'm zoomed up and I'm going to hold my Alt key down and use my mouse wheel to zoom up, the hand tool is basically to pan. It's a panning tool. Another shortcut, if you're in another tool, is I can hold my space bar down, and that'll be a quick setting to get to the panning tool. The magnifying glass is just that. That'll allow me to take an area and zoom, just dragging my mouse with the left click down to the left and right to zoom in and out. Then we have the foreground and background colors. We talked about that a little bit more. The default, you can see here in the upper left-hand corner, is black foreground, white background, and you can change that with, again, the eyedropper tool. If I wanted to change the background, let's see, cancel that, and change the background, I can use this tool to do that. The eyedropper then would also give me a different color there, and I could switch these out if I wanted that to become the background, and select a different color if I wanted that to be the foreground, and so you can manipulate what happens there. It comes in handy if you're trying to keep an overall color palette going with a particular set of images. I'll revert that to the default setting. Okay, so if we move to the right, we'll see the history panel that's here. You typically have this open. Again, there are different workspace environments that you can have set up with Photoshop. I tend to stick to the essentials as it's noted there. So I get the history panel here so I can move up and down. I don't have to rely on Control Z all the time. I can be really specific about how far I'm going back to undo a lot of the operations that I have done. There are color swatches. This is the default color swatch that comes up, and you can add to this using the eyedropper tool. So if you wanted a specific blue to occur there, you should be able to bring that over into this area. Let's say, okay. And I just right-clicked in that swatches area, and it adds that blue. If I wanted the brown, so that's the foreground color, I'll just go over here and right-click and swatch to it now that brown. So you can start to add and broaden your swatches. There are other Pantone swatches and so forth that you could come up with. We don't necessarily need to get into that, but you can get an idea how that starts to work. Adjustments and styles, that's not something we get into a whole lot. We won't be using much of that. We will be using, though, layers, so it becomes really important. Some of the manipulations that I was making before were regardless of layers. So I'm actually painting or distorting those blue pixels that we're looking at in that facade. But perhaps you don't want to do that. I'm going to Control Z, and perhaps you actually want that to be on a different layer. So I can go down to the bottom here, and this little icon there, you can see a little paper is create new layer. So I can create a new layer, and then I simply select one or the other, and this is in order of how you see it. And so layer 1 will be on top of layer 2. So I'll click on layer 1, and I'll do some of that brown work on the facade here. And now if I turn that layer off, you can see that the main image is still untouched below. That allows me to do a variety of things and get into some of the layer effects and so forth that we'll get into later in the semester. I can also change the opacity of this layer, so if I wanted it to be just a hint of that brown blob, I guess I could do that. How much it's filled, you can get into that as well. See how it affects that layer there. And there are some other layer effects that are actually really very handy that we'll get into deeper in the semester. One that I think is really valuable when we get into rendering, and not that this is going to turn out very good because this is not a really great brown color, is what's called an overlay. So now it just actually took that area, that brown area, and overlaid that, and then began to combine those two layers together as opposed to just a pure one layer over the other or pure transparency over the other. So you can see how that started to affect the tonality of the image, and if I turn it off, you can see the difference between the two. So it starts to be kind of subtle, starts to add a potential for some dynamics within the image, and hopefully that is something that can facilitate your ideas as you move forward. That's going to be it for this first tutorial dealing with the general interface of Photoshop. The next one will be getting deeper into actually some of the steps that you'll be involved with for the exercise. So I'll be walking through some of what might you consider in terms of manipulating the image, how you might start to do that in various ways. Here I'm just selecting an area, and I can blur specific areas based off of the selection tool. So I'll be getting into using a little bit more of these kinds of tools that are specific to the exercise. All right, thank you very much, and check out the next one.